She was abandoned on Christmas Eve, until Billionaire's daughter changed her life forever. Please, don't cry. It's Christmas Eve. Just look around. Laughter spills through the air like golden ribbons. Glasses clink together with a sound as delicate as wind chimes. Families huddle close in warm circles of joy, and children squeal with delight. And yet there she is, sitting alone at a candlelit table, her heart aching in the middle of a restaurant so crowded it almost hums, yet somehow lonelier than the darkest night. She had just been rejected, humiliated in a blind date that unraveled before it even began, left behind as the rest of the world seemed to swirl in celebration. She sat there alone, her spirit frozen in place, whispering to herself that maybe, just maybe, this was the final page of her story. But sometimes the cruelest nights hold the doorway to the most luminous dawns. Her name was Emily Harper. She was 42 years old and worked as an assistant manager at a small bookstore in Charleston, South Carolina. Every year she spent Christmas with her family, sipping hot cocoa and playing Scrabble with her mother and her sister. But this year her sister had pleaded so insistently that Emily gave up that cozy evening to attend this date. A man described as polite, grounded, and looking for something real. Emily had believed. She had chosen her plum velvet dress, cream heels, painted her lips a deep wine red, and fastened her mother's tiny gemstone earrings. She even arrived 10 minutes early. But then he came in, Logan something, a name she hadn't even managed to fully remember, nearly 30 minutes late. The moment he sat down, his eyes already drifting elsewhere, he let out a sigh and said flatly that he didn't actually want to be there, that his mother had pushed him into it, that he was in some sort of unclear relationship. And then he added with a shrug and not even a hint of shame that he was sorry she went to the trouble of dressing up just to sit with someone like him. Then he stood up and left. Just like that. Left her there, unmoving. For a brief moment, Emily didn't know what to do. Her glass of water still untouched, the candle flickering softly, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Somewhere across the room, a piano played a quiet, slow version of Silent Night, and the sound made her throat tighten until it hurt. Emily pressed her hands together on the white tablecloth, holding herself together the best she could. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of all the smiling couples, the children tearing into red-wrapped gifts, and the silver-haired grandparents clinking their glasses in celebration. But the tears came anyway, warm and unstoppable, not only because of tonight, but because of every time she had trusted, every time she had dared to open her heart, every time she had told herself that this time might be different. But it never was. A man walked past her table, glanced, then quickly looked away. A young couple whispered to each other just out of earshot. She felt invisible, yet somehow the center of a silent joke. Emily thought just one more minute to gather herself, and then she would rise, walk out of this place, drive through streets blanketed with lights and snow, open a cheap bottle of wine at home, and tell herself how foolish she had been. Just one more minute. But before that minute could pass, a voice rose beside her, soft but clear. A little girl stood there, a fallen star-shaped hair clip dangling from her hand and slipping from her golden curls. Her eyes were round, filled with quiet concern, as she looked at Emily and asked a single simple question. "Are you okay?" And in that moment, small and fleeting as it was, something began to shift in Emily's world. If you've been listening and felt your heart sink gently alongside Emily's emotions, don't forget to subscribe to Emotional Echoes so you won't miss the quiet yet powerful stories of everyday life we share each day. Please take a moment to like and share this video to help us spread a little more love into the world. Where are you listening to this story from? Leave us a comment below and let us know your corner of the world so we can see just how far this emotional journey is reaching. And who knows, the next story we tell might speak directly to the one you carry deep within. Emily looked down at the little girl, trying to pull the corners of her lips into something resembling a smile. "I'm all right, sweetheart, thank you for asking," she said softly, her voice still tight with emotion. The girl tilted her head, studying Emily with a curious gaze that held an unexpected tenderness, the kind of sincere concern Emily had never thought could come from a child. "But you look really sad," the girl said, almost in a whisper. "My dad says being sad alone makes it even worse." Emily wanted to laugh, but the weight of humiliation still sat heavy on her chest like a stone. She nodded, eyes growing wetter. The girl turned her head and pointed across the restaurant to a table near the far wall, where a man sat watching them wearing a dark charcoal knit sweater. His hair slightly tousled, his expression filled with hesitant worry. For a moment it looked like he wanted to stand, but was held back by his own uncertainty. In his eyes there was something wordless and kind. Emily's heart was still shaking from being left behind from the sting of a night that she had hoped might be the beginning of something beautiful, but had instead turned into yet another wound in a long list of quiet disappointments. In her 42 years, she had always believed herself strong, capable of facing any kind of loneliness. But this time was different. It was Christmas, and something about the child's simple words began to melt the walls she had built around her heart. Outside, the church bells began to ring, pulling a gust of winter wind through the cracks in the windows. But at that small table, a fragile warmth had begun to stir. Before Emily could say anything more, the little girl spoke again, her voice clearer now, steady and sure. "My name is Ava. That's my dad over there. I asked him if I could come, but he said not to bother strangers. But I think you need someone to sit with you." Emily froze. There was something in the way she said it, in that fearless innocence, that made her forget for a moment who she was, how old she was, and how many times she had tried to hold herself together in moments just like this. Ava wore a deep blue velvet dress with a white lace collar, her golden hair tied neatly on both sides with satin ribbons. She looked like she had stepped out of an old-fashioned Christmas card. Emily could feel the gaze from across the room. The man had now risen from his seat and was making his way over, uncertainty visible in the way he moved. He reached the table and gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Ava, you can't just go around talking to strangers like that," he said quietly but firmly enough for Emily to hear. His voice was low, warm, with a hint of urgency. Ava turned to him, answering with confidence. "I just didn't want her to be sad all by herself. You always say no one should be alone and sad on Christmas Eve." Emily had managed to regain a bit of composure. She smiled and spoke gently. "It's all right. She actually made me feel a little less alone." The man looked at her, his hazel eyes flickering with both surprise and relief. "I'm really sorry," he said. She's very direct, and not the best at following instructions." Ava immediately interrupted. "That's not true. I follow instructions when they make sense." Emily laughed, a light, unburdened sound that she hadn't heard from herself in what felt like forever. "No need to apologize," she said. "She's truly wonderful." Ava turned to her father, her face lit up with hope. "So can we sit with her just for a little while? I promise I won't talk too loud." The man looked to Emily as if waiting for a signal. For a second she hesitated, but then, looking into the girl's expectant face and into the eyes of a man who wasn't hiding his sincerity, she nodded. "I'd really like that," she said, almost surprised by the sound of her own voice. Ava beamed and pulled her father into the seat across from Emily, the very chair that just minutes earlier had been abandoned and cold. The air shifted. It was no longer a hollow space filled with silence and shame, but a living place, touched by voices, by warmth, by the unexpected magic of a child's smile and the soft agreement of a woman who thought she had sealed her heart shut. Ava sat down, placing her small hands on the table, tilting her head curiously. "What's your name?" she asked. "I'm Emily," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Emily Harper. That's a pretty name. I'm Ava Preston. And my dad is Benjamin, but everyone calls him Ben." Ben smiled and nodded toward Emily. "It's really nice to meet you," he said. Emily looked at the father and daughter across from her and felt something in her chest loosen, her heartbeat softening. It was as if something long locked away was slowly being let out into the light. She didn't know where this evening would take her, but in that moment, for the first time in many years, she no longer felt completely alone. Ava quickly claimed the center of the table as if she were the hostess of the evening. She climbed up onto the tall chair, scooted herself close, then propped her elbows on the edge of the table and rested her chin in her hands like a grown-up, preparing to discuss something of great importance. Emily couldn't help but watch in quiet amazement at the girl's natural ease and clever sparkle. She glanced toward Ben, who gave a small apologetic tilt of the head, though the slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips said clearly he wasn't the least bit bothered. The waiter returned, momentarily surprised to find Emily no longer alone. He set the menus down, gently offered a polite nod, and something in his eyes looked oddly relieved. Ava was the first to speak, raising her hand like she was back in school. "I'd like a hot chocolate, please, with lots of marshmallows. If you have the snowman-shaped ones, even better." The waiter smiled and jotted it down. Ben ordered a plate of creamy pasta and salad. Emily, after a brief pause, chose the lasagna. Once the waiter walked away, Ava leaned across the table toward Emily and whispered as though revealing a national secret. "You know my dad's a terrible cook, but he makes really good pancakes, especially the kind with chocolate chips." Emily laughed. "That sounds delicious." Ava nodded solemnly. "I like his pancakes better than birthday cake." Ben chuckled and ran a hand along the edge of his napkin. "She has a habit of exaggerating." "I do not," Ava objected instantly. "I mean it." Emily felt the atmosphere around her shifting, the noise of the restaurant beginning to blur into the background, replaced by the soft warmth of laughter and idle stories. She noticed the way Ben looked at his daughter, eyes filled with calm patience, the kind that listens fully even when the story is about the neighbor's cat or a cartoon episode from months ago. There was something in their connection that wrapped around her, tender and aching at once. When the food arrived, Ava immediately launched into her Christmas wish list. "I asked Santa for a princess costume, a coloring book set, and a puppy, but Dad said we have to wait until after New Year's for the puppy." Emily smiled. "Puppies take a lot of responsibility." Ava nodded seriously. "I've been practicing. I've taken care of a teddy bear for 6 whole months. No shedding, no chewing, very well behaved." Ben glanced at Emily over the edge of his napkin. "As you can see, she's very persuasive." Emily laughed again, finding herself relaxing more and more in the company of these two strangers, who somehow didn't feel like strangers at all. Dinner continued with small stories, most of them led by Ava, while Ben and Emily exchanged the occasional glance, a quiet nod, a soft smile that said more than words. When dessert arrived, Ava squealed with joy. Her hot chocolate came exactly as she'd hoped, with marshmallows shaped like little snowmen bobbing on the surface. She turned to Emily, her eyes sparkling. "This is one of my best Christmases ever. Because I met you." Emily froze for a second, her heart tightening, touched in a way that caught her off guard. Maybe she had been given the greatest gift tonight after all. A hot cup of cocoa, a child at the center of the table, and a father whose eyes held the quiet warmth of snow beginning to melt. 3 days after Christmas Eve, Emily received a message. The screen of her phone lit up against the gray hush of the afternoon as she was rearranging the children's book section after the holiday break at the bookstore. The text came from an unfamiliar number, but the name signed at the bottom made her smile without hesitation. "Hi, Emily, this is Ben. I'm not sure if you remember the two of us. Ava's still talking about that hot chocolate, and she wanted to ask if you might like to have coffee with us sometime soon, or if you prefer just me. No rush to reply. Wishing you a gentle day." Emily paused, staring at the screen, unsure why her heart seemed to skip a beat. For a moment she saw again the image of Ava sitting between them, stirring her cocoa and talking about her stuffed bear as if it were a real pet. And then there was Ben's gaze, warm, patient, yet carrying a quiet absence behind the softness. She touched the keyboard, then erased her first few words. It took her nearly an hour to send a response, short but honest. "I remember you both very well. Coffee sounds wonderful." After that, everything unfolded slowly, naturally, as if it had been gently planned long before either of them knew it. They met on a Saturday afternoon at a little cafe tucked into the corner of the old quarter near the river in Charleston. The cafe was called Magnolia and Maple, with windows fogged by breath and weather and soft jazz flowing like water through the air. Ben arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a brown coat and a gray scarf, looking both composed and quietly at ease. Emily stepped in, her hands still cold, her heart caught between anticipation and something unexpectedly tender as she saw him rise to greet her like a gentleman from another time. They ordered 2 coffees, black and unsweetened, for Ben, a cinnamon-dusted cappuccino for Emily. At first the conversation stayed on the surface, the weather work. Emily told him about a boy at the store who always brought a plastic dinosaur to story hour and insisted it could read. Ben talked about Ava's newfound love for building miniature houses and how she was determined to repaint her room in pink and yellow. These little stories, light as they were, became bridges between two people who had once been strangers. As they spoke, Emily noticed how Ben listened, truly listened. He never interrupted, and sometimes he furrowed his brow without realizing it, especially when speaking about life's quiet burdens. She didn't ask about Ava's mother, and he didn't mention her. But there was something in his eyes when he spoke about his daughter that told Emily there was a kind of loss beneath all that gentleness, a sorrow that had never been named out loud. After that first coffee, they kept texting. Not constantly, not intensely, but enough to feel like someone was there hearing the quiet parts of the day with you. One time, Emily sent Ben a photo of a pancake she had attempted, inspired by Ava's enthusiastic instructions. He replied with a picture of a pancake topped with a syrup-drawn heart, clearly made by Ava, along with a note: Ava gives you an 8 out of 10 minus points for no rainbow toppings. One Wednesday afternoon, when work had tied her in knots and her mind felt like a tangled skein, Emily received a message. If you're free later, I'd love to buy you a hot cocoa. No reason, just a cloudy afternoon. So they met again at the same cafe this time, talking less simply, watching the river slip past the windows, and letting the quiet between them say what didn't need to be spoken. Emily couldn't say exactly when she began to look forward to Ben's messages each morning, or when she started hoping for a spontaneous weekend coffee. But she knew, without any uncertainty, that he and Ava had begun to settle into her life. Not with urgency, but with the steady presence of something real. Like a song she had forgotten she once longed to hear, and now couldn't imagine her days without. That day, a fine rain had begun to fall. Emily had just finished her shift, her coat faintly damp, her steps weary from standing behind the counter since morning. Ben had texted to say he was nearby and asked if she might like a cup of hot ginger tea. She said yes. They met as they often did at Magnolia and Maple. Their usual spot by the window was still unclaimed, the soft golden light casting a gentle glow across the table where steam curled from the teacups like breath in cold air. This time there was no small talk, no easy chatter about work or weather. Instead, a quiet hung between them, the kind that seems to be waiting for something not dramatic, just true to be spoken. It was Ben who broke the silence. Emily, I've never told anyone outside of my family, but I think I owe you this part of the story. She looked at him, her eyes steady, waiting without pressing. Ava lost her mother when she was 3. Her name was Lauren. He paused, his voice roughening slightly. We got married when I was 28. Lauren worked in fashion. She was brilliant, quick, the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. Ben leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to some faraway place. When she got pregnant, we were so happy we couldn't quite believe it. But after Ava was born, things became difficult. Lauren developed a rare autoimmune condition. We didn't see it coming. It moved fast. She was gone before Ava turned 2. Emily sat in silence, her hands wrapped gently around her cup. I panicked, Ben went on, his tone even as if carefully managing a trembling beneath the surface. I didn't know how to be a single parent. I did everything by the book, then messed it up, then fixed it and messed it up again. Ava was the only reason I could get up each day. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but every morning she'd look at me and say, Daddy, what are we having for breakfast? Like life just kept going. He let out a quiet laugh, one that held both ache and gratitude. She was the love of my life, and for a long time I didn't think I could ever love anyone else. Emily said nothing, just met his gaze. In his eyes she saw a scar, not raw, but never quite healed. Then she nodded softly. I had someone once too, she said, her voice slow, careful. We got engaged when I was 32. It felt like everything was finally in place. But then he changed his mind. Suddenly. No real explanation. One day he called and said he couldn't do it, and then he was just gone. She exhaled. It took me months to sleep through the night again. After that, I started questioning everything about myself. What was wrong with me? Why is it always me being left behind? Ben leaned toward her, his expression gentling. Emily, I can't imagine how that must have felt. But I believe the things we've lost, they don't disappear completely. They turn into something else, into caution, into empathy, into the way we care for whoever comes next. She looked at him, her throat tightening. What if I still carry all that fear? What if I can't get everything right from the start? Ben was quiet for a moment, then said, Then I'll wait until you're ready. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be real. And in that moment, something in Emily shifted, not vanished, not erased, but touched, seen. As if all the fractures inside her had been acknowledged, not to be fixed, but to be honored, that they were still there and that they could still be loved. Outside, the rain was falling harder, tapping softly against the glass. But inside, the candle still burned low, and the two of them sat there, each carrying their own quiet ruins. Yet for the first time, neither one felt ashamed of the pieces they held. On a Friday afternoon in the middle of January, when the pale sunlight stretched softly across the pavement, still marked by patches of last night's rain, Emily received an unexpected invitation. Ben called her just after work, his voice slightly hesitant, though still carrying that quiet sincerity she had come to recognize. "Are you free tonight? Ava just baked almond cookies for the first time and insists on having you over for dinner." I couldn't say no to her. "And, truthfully, I'd really like you to come." Emily hesitated for a moment, then said yes. It was the first time she visited their home. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood on the northern edge of Charleston, the house was modest, surrounded by a white picket fence and framed by bougainvillea climbing over the arch above the gate. As she stepped inside, the air carried a faint scent of pine and cinnamon, a fragrance that pulled her back to the memory of a recent Christmas. Ava opened the door with the brightness of a small sun. She wore an apron covered in cookie prints and proudly introduced herself as the head chef of the evening. Behind her stood Ben, offering his familiar warm smile as he tilted his head and welcomed Emily inside. The house was neat, simply arranged, but full of warmth. Ava's drawings lined the hallway walls, colorful and earnest, while in the living room hung a large photograph of Lauren, Ben's late wife. In the picture, she was holding a baby Ava in her arms, her expression gentle, her face serene. Emily paused briefly when she saw it, but Ava had already taken her hand and was tugging her toward the kitchen, where the table had been carefully set. There was a platter of roasted meat sauce pasta, a bowl of mixed green salad garlic bread, and a tray of cookies still warm from the oven. Ava sat in the middle, chattering about kneading dough and her decision to add chocolate chips because Miss Emily likes things not too sweet. Ben poured lemonade into glasses, and now and then his gaze lingered on Emily. Each time it did, she felt something wordless, something that told her she was truly welcome here. Throughout the meal, no one mentioned anything heavy. Ava told stories about school, about a classmate who always wrote his letters backward, about a drawing assignment where she had to invent a mythical animal. Emily listened with the attention of someone who understood that the little things often matter the most. Occasionally, she caught Ben watching her across the table, saying nothing, but every glance seemed to carry a quiet thank you. After dinner, Ava insisted on teaching Emily how to play dominoes in the living room. Ben washed the dishes, pausing every so often to glance over and smile at the sounds of their laughter, the room filled with the soft clicks of tiles, giggles, and an easy silence that didn't need filling. When the clock neared 8, Ava began to yawn. Ben gave her a gentle look, signaling it was bedtime. Before heading upstairs, Ava wrapped her arms around Emily and whispered, "Can you come to dinner every week?" Emily hugged her back and smiled. "Only if you agree to share that cookie recipe." Ava nodded earnestly, then bounded up the stairs. Now just the two of them, Ben took a seat across from Emily, folding his hands together on the wooden table. "Thank you for coming. I know this might have felt like a big step, but I want you to know, I don't invite just anyone here. Ava really adores you. I do too." Emily looked around the room, saw how the warm light from the lamp played off the edges of the picture frame, heard the soft sound of water still trickling into the sink, and realized she was no longer in unfamiliar space. "I'm really glad I came," she said, and she meant it. Because tonight in this small house, she hadn't just shared a meal. She had been welcomed into something slowly becoming familiar, something quietly beginning to feel like home. The following weekend after dinner at Ben's house, the weather turned remarkably beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the arches of trees, casting a golden shimmer across the pavement, like a delicate layer of light had been brushed over everything. Emily had just planned to spend her quiet Sunday with a book when a message arrived from Ben. "We're about to head out for a day trip to Tybee Island. Too nice a day to stay indoors. Ava was wondering if you might want to come along." I was hoping the same. Emily read the message more than once, a smile blooming quietly as she typed a single word in reply. "Yes." They met at the beach at 10 in the morning. Ava was already racing ahead barefoot across the damp sand, clutching a bright orange bucket filled with plastic tools for castle building. Ben came behind, carrying a large blanket, a cooler bag, and a few soft towels. Emily wore a flowing sea blue dress, a white button-up shirt over her shoulders, and her hair pinned up neatly, though the breeze quickly tugged loose a few strands. When Ava spotted her, she waved as if it had been years since they last met. Ben smiled too, a quiet, open smile that made it impossible to mistake how happy he was she'd come. They found a stretch of sand slightly away from the crowd, just far enough to let the sound of waves become their nearest music. The wind carried the soft sting of salt and brushed their skin like a whispered welcome. Ava dove straight into her project, assigning tasks like a tiny forewoman with grand architectural dreams. "Emily, you're on seashell detail. We need elegant decorations." "Dad, the moat's not deep enough. Sea dragons can totally crawl through that." Ben laughed, his hands coated in wet sand. Then the princess shall have a stronger moat, he said. Emily couldn't stop smiling. She found herself laughing more in that one morning than she had all week. Something about the rhythm of the ocean and Ava's endless chatter made the usual quiet inside her mind soften and float away. By noon, they were sitting on the blanket, eating cold chicken sandwiches and sliced fruit from containers. Ava, mid-bite, launched into a story about her new swimming lessons at school, using her small arms to demonstrate the strokes with great seriousness. Emily listened intently occasionally, glancing at Ben, catching the proud light in his eyes whenever he looked at his daughter. When Ava finally grew tired and curled up in the shade for a nap, Ben and Emily stayed where they were sitting side by side in a silence that didn't feel empty. She could feel his presence beside her like a quiet rhythm, steady and close. He reached into the cooler and handed her a glass of lemonade. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. "It means a lot to us to have you here." Emily smiled, turning the glass slowly in her hand. "I'm glad I came. Honestly, I haven't had a Sunday this easy, and I don't even remember how long." Ben looked at her, squinting slightly from the sunlight, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his expression. "You know, Ava told me that if you lived nearby, there would always be a princess to help build castles every weekend." Emily laughed. "She's got big dreams." Just like her mother, Ben said, then paused, the space around his words suddenly tender. Lauren loved the ocean. She used to say the sea makes us feel small in the best way, like it opens up your heart. Emily didn't answer. She looked out at the water, the surface flickering with silver beneath the midday sun, and something in her chest lifted. A strange mix of peace and gratitude welled up inside her. Gratitude for being here, for Ava, for Ben, and for herself, for still being capable of saying yes to something new after everything. Later, as the sun dipped slightly and shadows lengthened, Ava stirred awake and immediately shrieked with delight and horror to see the castle reduced to a heap by the tide. But instead of tears, she burst out laughing. "Next time we build farther back and taller." Emily watched the father and daughter standing at the water's edge, hand in hand, before Ben turned and looked back at her, a quiet invitation in his eyes. She slipped off her sandals, and walked barefoot across the damp sand toward them, thinking to herself, maybe this isn't one of those endless, uncertain next times. Maybe this is the very first time of something real, something finally worth trusting. That night, after a long day at the beach filled with sunlight and laughter, Emily lay in bed unable to sleep. Her thoughts drifted to sandcastles, to the feel of warm hands held together under the soft fading light, and to the way Ben had looked at her while the three of them sat together on the blanket. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her, not out of fear, but from a quiet sense of familiarity that had grown larger with each passing moment. She had never imagined that a small family could make her feel like she was rediscovering something she had once lost. The next day, just as she finished teaching and was packing up to go home, her phone rang. It was Ben. His voice was urgent, though not panicked. Ava had just woken from a nightmare, he said. She'd cried out in the middle of the night, talking in her sleep about her mother, then sobbed uncontrollably. He wasn't sure if he should call a doctor or if it was simply exhaustion from the trip. But when she kept asking the same question over and over, he decided to call Emily. She kept asking, he said quietly, "Where's Miss Emily? I want her to hold me like Mommy used to." Emily didn't hesitate. She drove through streets glowing with soft amber streetlight, the warmth of her headlights cutting through the quiet dusk. When she stepped inside the house, Ava was curled on the couch, her eyes swollen, her hair tangled and clinging to her face. The moment she saw Emily, she rushed into her arms with a force that felt like breath returning. Emily wrapped her tightly, holding that small, trembling body against her. "I'm here now," she whispered. "It's all right." They stayed like that for a long time until Ava's breathing slowed, soft and steady against her chest. Ben stood silently nearby, his hands in his pockets, eyes full of helplessness and gratitude. When Ava finally fell asleep, still curled in Emily's lap, Ben gently helped settle her into bed, then invited Emily into the kitchen. He brewed 2 cups of tea and sat across from her, his posture quiet, the hour late and hushed. "I'm sorry for calling you so late," he said, "but Ava hasn't talked about Lauren this much since she passed. I think maybe because things are shifting lately." Emily nodded, turning the warm cup slowly in her hands. "I don't mind. But maybe I'm intruding on a space you and Ava have already learned how to fill. I don't want to disrupt that." Ben looked at her, steady and serious. "You're not disrupting anything. Ava feels safe with you, and I know if there's anyone she could trust, it's you." There was a pause. Then his voice grew softer, edged with something deeper. "But there's something I need to tell you. It might sound strange, or even a little frightening. Emily's hands tensed slightly around her cup. Tell me. Last night, Ben said when she woke from the nightmare she called you Mom. Emily looked up, her breath catching in her throat. It was just one word Ben said. But I know she wasn't confused. She knows Lauren is gone. She understands that. But I think in that moment of fear she reached for whatever made her feel safest, and that was you. Something cracked open in Emily's chest, not from pain, but from a quiet, unnameable emotion that went straight to the center of her being. Part of her wanted to run upstairs, wrap Ava in her arms, and promise she'd never leave. But another part, shaped by years of disappointments of being left and learning to expect it, pulled her back. I don't know if I'll be any good at this, she whispered. I don't know if I can fill that kind of space. Ben reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. You don't have to replace anyone. You only have to be yourself. Ava doesn't need another Lauren. She just needs someone who stays. She called for you, in the dark. That wasn't a mistake. Don't be afraid of what that means. Emily didn't respond right away. She turned toward the window where the street lamp light shimmered faintly across the glass. She thought about the first time she met Ava, about the dinner with chocolate ice cream, and a smile dusted in cookie crumbs. She thought about that single word Mom, not as a title, but as a tether, a longing for closeness, for safety. And she realized if she walked away now, she wouldn't just be turning down a relationship. She'd be turning away from something her heart had been slowly, quietly learning how to open itself to. She looked back at Ben. I can't promise anything, she said slowly, but I won't run. Ben smiled a tired smile, touched with relief and honesty. That's more than enough for me. And for the first time, Emily felt it too. That was enough. A week after the night Ava called out for her mother in a dream, Emily still carried the echo of that moment inside her. Each time she visited Ben's house, Ava would wrap her arms around her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. And though Emily always smiled and held her close, there was something she couldn't ignore. Every time she stepped into the house, she felt the gentle presence of Lauren, the woman in the large photograph that hung in the living room. That quiet gaze, soft and kind, seemed to follow her, not haunting, not unwelcoming, but undeniably present. Emily never felt threatened by it, but she couldn't deny that Lauren remained an irreplaceable part of the home. One evening, after Ava had fallen into a deep sleep, Emily and Ben sat together on the porch. The air was cool, and the faint scent of pine still lingered from the wood used in dinner. Across the street, lights twinkled softly in a neighbor's window. Emily spoke, her voice low and careful. You've kept everything of hers just the way it was. Ben turned to her. You mean Lauren? Emily nodded. I understand that. I respect it. But I need you to know, sometimes I feel like I'm stepping into someone else's life, and no one ever really opened the door to let me in. Ben was quiet for a long moment, then let out a breath. I lived with Lauren's memory for a long time after she passed, and it took me years to understand that moving forward doesn't mean letting go of the person you lost. His voice deepened. She's part of my life. She always will be. She's Ava's mother. But Emily, Lauren is no longer here, and I don't want my daughter to grow up in the shadow of someone who can't come back. Emily met his eyes, seeing something fragile and honest reflected there. Do you think you're really ready to step out of that shadow? Ben nodded, this time without hesitation. I think I started the moment Ava asked about you. The first time she laughed again after months of silence. The moment I realized, your presence doesn't erase Lauren. It makes the memories feel lighter. He turned toward her fully. There's a room in the house I've never opened since she passed. It was her studio. I left everything just as it was, like keeping her close. But I think it's time to open that door. The next morning, Ben sent Emily a message. If you're free, I'd like you to come by. When she arrived, he led her upstairs to a white door at the end of the hallway, its paint slightly yellowed with age. He opened it without a word. Inside, dust coated the surfaces in a thin layer. Sunlight filtered in through drawn curtains, casting quiet beams across shelves of books, neatly stacked fashion magazines, and a sewing kit left mid-project. On a dress form stood an unfinished blouse, a safety pin still clipped to the cuff. Emily stepped in slowly. She didn't touch anything. She simply stood in the middle of the room, letting the silence speak. There was love here. There was passion. There was the life of someone who had once dreamed in color and fabric and thread. Ben moved beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I want to turn this room into a reading space for Ava, and if you'd like a place where you can write or sit with tea. Not Lauren's room anymore. Something new. A space for now. Emily turned to him, her heartbeat slower, deeper. Are you sure? I'm sure, Ben said. Because I don't want you to feel like you're always standing outside the frame. I want you to know there's space for you here, not as a replacement, just as yourself. And in that moment, Emily felt something open, not just a door, not just a room, but something far more intimate. She felt the door of his heart unfasten gently, fully. The place where an old memory had paused, now making way for something present, something real. A light stepping in. That morning, as Emily was preparing for a story time session with a group of children at the local library, her phone rang. It was Ben. His voice, though calm as always, carried a softness and hesitation she hadn't heard before. He told her his mother Elaine would be attending Ava's school art performance later that day, while Ava's maternal grandparents were stuck in traffic and wouldn't make it on time. Ava had insisted that Emily had to come, he added with a quiet chuckle. Then, after a pause that felt heavy with meaning, Ben asked, "Would you come with me to meet my mother, I think? It's time." Emily stood still among the rows of books, her heart tightening with a sudden unfamiliar nervousness. She had heard Ben speak of Elaine before, a strong, independent woman, a little traditional and deeply attached to Lauren. The idea of stepping into that shadow, of standing in front of someone who had loved Lauren as both daughter-in-law and friend, made Emily falter. But then she thought of Ava, her glowing eyes, every time she talked about the performance, her excitement bubbling over, like it was the most important event in the world. Emily nodded into the phone. "I'll come." They met at the school courtyard, where rows of plastic chairs had been arranged beneath the soft warmth of spring sunlight. Children ran everywhere. Colorful music hummed from old speakers, and the air was filled with the hum of conversation and the scattered laughter of parents. Ava wore a sky-blue dress, her hair braided neatly on both sides, her cheeks rosy with anticipation. The moment she spotted Emily from across the yard, she squealed with joy and rushed over, throwing her arms around her like someone finally coming home. Emily bent down, kissed her gently on the forehead, then took her hand and walked her toward the rows of seats. Ben stood nearby beside an older woman with an upright posture, short silver hair, and a perfectly tailored beige coat. A string of pearls rested at her collarbone, and her gray eyes were clear, sharp, and observant. "Mom, this is Emily," Ben said, his gaze steady and encouraging. Emily smiled and offered her hand. "It's lovely to meet you. Ava's told me so many wonderful things about you." Elaine shook her hand lightly, but not coldly. "I've heard quite a lot about you, too." Then she turned to Ben, her expression unreadable. "This little one never stops talking about Emily. She even drew a picture once, 3 of you walking on the beach holding hands." Emily flushed, unsure of what to say, but Elaine gave a faint, knowing smile. "She's a sensitive child, and clearly you've made her feel safe." The performance began with a choir of children singing a spring medley, followed by a dance with silk scarves and a group storytelling act. Ava appeared in the third segment, dressed as a singing tulip, wearing a flower crown that drooped slightly to one side. Her voice wavered at first, but when she saw Emily in the crowd, her eyes lit up, and the rest of the song carried with it a quiet joy that felt larger than the little stage. When the piece ended, she bowed deeply and waved not toward her father as she had always done in the past, but directly to Emily. Elaine noticed. After the performance, they all gathered in the schoolyard, where parents stood chatting and children tugged at sleeves, asking for juice and cookies. Emily was pouring juice into a paper cup for Ava when Elaine approached her quietly. "When Lauren was alive, she once told me that if anything ever happened to her, the thing she feared most wasn't for Ben. It was for Ava. She was afraid Ava wouldn't have someone to share her feelings with, someone who would hold her when she woke from bad dreams." Emily turned to face her, unsure of how to respond. Elaine continued, her voice lower, touched with something softer. "I don't know exactly who you are in Ben's life, but I do know this. After today, Ava won't have to reach into memory to feel loved." She reached out and touched Emily's hand gently, her eyes softer now, less guarded. "Thank you for being here." Emily swallowed the knot rising in her throat. She nodded and smiled, unable to find the right words. But in that moment, she didn't need them. Because what Elaine had given her was something greater than simple approval. It was trust, not just from a mother, but from the past, the present, and whatever future might come. And within Emily, something bloomed, small, quiet, and steady, like a tulip opening its petals in early spring. Not because it was easy, but because it was time. That evening, after the school performance, the 3 of them returned to Ben's house for dinner. Elaine had been invited to stay, and the meal unfolded in the kind of warmth that came not from elaborate preparations, but from quiet care and genuine presence. Ava could hardly sit still, chattering nonstop about all the behind-the-scenes drama at school, how her tulip dress had nearly been torn, how one of her classmates had sung the wrong lyrics so badly she almost burst out laughing on stage. Emily sat beside her, listening closely, smiling as she gently added more vegetables to Ava's plate. Across the table, Ben watched the two of them, his eyes filled with a deep, steady kind of contentment that said more than any words ever could. After dinner, while Ava went upstairs to change into her pajamas, and Ben stayed in the kitchen washing dishes, Elaine poured a cup of tea for Emily and asked if she'd join her on the back porch. The day was folding into twilight, the sky melting from orange into a soft lilac hue. Somewhere in the garden, the first summer insects had begun to hum. Elaine looked at Emily, her gray eyes no longer sharp with formality but softened by something quieter, something forged through grief and time. "I used to be afraid Ben would never open his heart again," she began slowly. "When Lauren died, it was like he closed every door inside himself. He did everything for Ava, but I could see it, he was hollow. Like the best part of his life had been carried away." Emily didn't speak, just listened, heart still from the weight of the honesty being offered to her. Then one day Ava started talking about someone named Emily. At first I thought she meant a new teacher or a librarian, but then she kept going. She said you knew how to make pancakes without burning the edges, that you could name flowers like her mother used to. Elaine paused, her voice turning softer. And then I saw the way Ava slept clutching a pillow with a drawing on it, a picture she made herself, 3 people holding hands, Ben, Ava, and Emily. That's when I started to understand. She took a slow sip of tea. Today, watching her on that stage, I saw something had changed. She was brighter, stronger, and I knew it wasn't just time that healed her. It was someone quietly filling in the spaces that were left behind. Emily turned to her eyes glistening. "I never thought I could replace Lauren. I just tried not to hurt anyone." Elaine shook her head gently. "No one's asking you to replace her. Lauren was one of a kind, but Ava still needs a woman to love and be loved by. And Ben, he needs someone who can show him that the past doesn't have to be a prison, that it can be the foundation for something new." She reached out and placed her hand over Emily's, her grip light but full of meaning. "You're good for them, both of them. And I believe in your own quiet way you're learning to forgive yourself too." Emily looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she didn't feel like she needed permission to be there. She had been welcomed, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. The sky outside darkened fully. Inside, Ava's footsteps pounded down the hallway as she remembered she'd left her favorite stuffed animal downstairs. Ben's voice called out from the kitchen, asking if she wanted Emily to read her bedtime story tonight. Emily smiled. She turned back to Elaine and gave her a silent, grateful nod. Then she rose and stepped into the house, into the warm glow of yellow light, into the laughter of a child, into the presence of a man who had waited quietly, patiently for someone to walk this new path beside him. And what had begun on a tearful Christmas night was now unfolding not in grand declarations, but in the slow, steadfast bloom of trust and a love formed in the quiet places of the heart. A love made not of replacements or promises, but of presence. And that at last was more than enough. Ava's birthday fell on a Saturday morning in early April, the kind of morning that looked as if it had been painted with gentle watercolors, soft sunlight, clear skies, and air so light it barely touched the skin. Emily arrived early, carrying a vanilla cake she had baked herself, its surface adorned with tiny pink and yellow tulips made of sugar. The moment Ava opened the door, she threw her arms around Emily with a joy so pure it was as if no gift could ever mean more than her presence. Inside the living room, pastel ribbons floated gently from the ceiling, and balloons in every shape and color filled the corners like quiet bursts of celebration. By the window stood a birthday gift table, and beside it a large sign written in Ava's careful handwriting, "Best 7th birthday ever." Emily smiled when she saw it. Every detail spoke of Ava's excitement, not just for the cake or the presents, but for the quiet, certain feeling of being deeply loved. The party took place in the backyard beneath blooming trees dusted with tiny white flowers. Children darted back and forth chasing hoops and hunting for candy hidden in colorful cloth pouches. Ben had set up a small tent labeled Reading Camp, Ava's idea, and Emily had been chosen as the special storyteller. She sat at the center of a circle of eager faces holding a picture book filled with whimsical illustrations. Her voice rose and fell like music, carrying the children into the tale of a curly-haired princess who loved to bake and a dragon who didn't like baths. Every time she glanced up, she caught Ava's eyes shining at her, filled with awe and affection. When story time ended, it was time to sing Happy Birthday. Everyone gathered around the table where Emily's cake stood proudly. Ava closed her eyes during the song, then opened them to blow out the candles. She made a wish in a soft whisper only she could hear, then turned and held her gaze on Emily, smiling for a long, quiet moment. As the guests drifted into conversations and the children returned to play, Ben walked over to Emily with 2 cups of lemonade in hand. "You made today unforgettable for Ava," he said, his voice warm. "I think she'll carry this birthday with her for a long, long time." Emily accepted the drink and tapped her glass gently against his. "I won't forget it either, not because of the cake or the decorations, but because of the way Ava looked at me. I don't think anyone has ever looked at me like that. Like you're the most important person in their world," Ben said softly. Emily nodded, her voice catching. "And that makes me want to be better." Just then, Ava came running back, wrapping herself around Emily's legs before looking up with sudden seriousness. "Miss Emily, this is the happiest birthday I've ever had, not because of the presents, because you're here." Emily crouched down and pulled her into a hug. "I'm so happy to be here too, Ava." Ava leaned in and whispered in her ear, "I wish that you'd be at all my birthdays." Emily paused for a moment, the breath in her chest stilling, then smiled and whispered back, "I wish that too, with all my heart." As Ava dashed off to show a new toy to her friends, Emily looked up at Ben. They didn't need to say anything more. In the gentle afternoon light, surrounded by the laughter of children and the drifting scent of magnolia blooms, Emily felt something inside her finally come to rest. No fear, no questions, just a peace she once believed she didn't deserve. And for the first time in many years, Emily began to believe deeply, quietly, that she had found the place she was always meant to belong. The sky had deepened into twilight by the time Ava's birthday party came to a close. The pastel balloons tied along the fence swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the string lights draped between the trees flickered softly like they were trying to hold on to the last flickers of joy from the day. Ava had changed out of her tulip dress into panda print pajamas, her small arms wrapped tightly around her favorite gift of the day, a photo book Emily had made filled with printed snapshots capturing nearly a year of quiet, extraordinary moments shared between the 3 of them. When Emily stepped into the living room, Ava was already waiting on the couch, her legs swinging gently, eyes bright with something unspoken. Ben was still outside, tidying up the backyard, giving them a moment alone. "Miss Emily," Ava said, her voice soft but steady. Emily sat beside her. "I'm listening." Ava turned, setting the book in her lap, her tiny hand resting on top of Emily's. "You know, when I blew out the candles, I made a really, really important wish." Emily smiled. "Are you sure you want to tell me? Isn't it supposed to be a secret, or else it won't come true?" Ava shook her head. "It's okay, I want you to know." She paused, took a deep breath like she was bracing for the most serious moment of her life. "I wished that you would be my family." For a second, Emily felt her heart stop. She looked into Ava's wide, unwavering eyes, and there was no trace of childish whimsy. This wasn't a sweet remark made in the flush of celebration. It was something else, something rooted and brave. This was a child opening her heart, giving a name to a longing, trusting that the person in front of her might just say yes. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Ava, that's a very special wish." Ava nodded solemnly. "I know. But I don't just want you at my birthday. I want you on all the days. When I get a bad grade in math, when I need someone to read to me at bedtime, when I have a nightmare, when I go on field trips, I want you there, like a mom, but as you." Emily turned her face slightly, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand before Ava could see. Then she pulled the little girl into her arms, holding her with a tenderness that came from someplace deep, someplace that had been aching for exactly this moment. "I don't know what to say, Ava. You've just made me feel like the luckiest person in the world," Ava whispered against her shoulder. "So, can you be my family?" Emily pulled back just enough to cup the child's face in her hands. She looked into those steady, hopeful eyes and said, "If you'll have me, then yes. I'll be your family, not tomorrow, not someday, from now, from this very moment." Ava's smile lit up the room brighter than all the string lights combined. She wrapped her arms around Emily's neck and whispered, "I love you," in a voice so soft, yet it echoed through Emily's chest like a vow that would never fade. At that moment, Ben stepped inside. He stopped in the doorway, watching the 2 of them. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, taking it all in. Emily looked up and met his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. In his gaze was everything: acceptance, gratitude, and a sense of something deeply right. There was no ring, no grand proposal, no scripted ritual. And yet in that quiet second, Emily knew she had been chosen, not just by Ben, but by the purest heart in the house. And as she held Ava close, her hand resting gently against the photo book nestled on the cushion, a thought stirred inside her. Some families don't begin with blood. Some begin with a whisper, a small question, and an answer that echoes quietly but forever in the heart. 1 year to the day after that Christmas Eve, Savannah was once again cloaked in the soft chill that only winter could bring. The historic streets shimmered under festive lights, each window adorned with strands of silver tinsel and fresh green wreaths. People walked slowly hand in hand beneath leafless trees, the crisp air brushing their cheeks. From the little church at the end of the street, a bell chimed gently as if to remind the town that the season of warmth had truly returned. Emily stepped out of her car in front of Giovanni's, the restaurant where it had all begun. She wore a deep wine-colored knit coat, and underneath a gray dress that Ben had once said made her look gentle and strong all at once. Her hair was pinned up neatly, save for a few loose strands that softened her face. In her eyes lived a quiet mix of nerves and calm, the kind that comes when your heart knows change is near, but not unwelcome. She didn't know exactly what to expect inside, only that Ben had asked her to be there at this hour and to trust him enough not to ask questions. When she stepped through the doors, memory came rushing in like an old familiar song. The small table by the window was still there, its candlelight flickering against the cold glass pane. The same waiter greeted her by name as though no time had passed. But something was different. On the table lay a small, elegant card, handwritten with quiet intention. "Welcome back, Emily." She had barely settled into her seat when Ben appeared behind her. He wore a dark suit, simple but thoughtful, and his smile held something both steady and tender as he rested a hand on the back of her chair. "I think I owe you a dinner without any tears," he said. Emily laughed softly. "And I hope this one doesn't end with someone walking away." He sat across from her, folding his hands, and for a moment simply looked at her, as if memorizing every detail in silence. "I've thought a lot about that night," he said. "You sitting here alone, thinking the world had left you behind. And I still thank fate for letting me arrive exactly when I did." She didn't reply right away. There were moments that didn't ask for words. She simply listened, letting each syllable settle over her like the first snowfall of the season. Their wine came a rich red just like the first time. The appetizer was the same too. No mention was made of Lauren, no need to speak of grief. And yet in that silence, something full and honest passed between them. After dinner, when the restaurant's lights dimmed and the soft hum of a piano drifted in from the far end of the room, Ben leaned in a little closer. "I didn't bring you here only for nostalgia," he said. Emily looked up. Her breath caught somewhere between a question and a memory. "I brought you here because I wanted to do this in the exact place where everything began. Not a promise, not a proposal, no expectations, just a simple, honest question." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. Not velvet, not diamonds. Just something drawn in pencil, carefully colored in. Ava's drawing. The three of them standing together, hand in hand. Above them, the words, "Family Forever," written with all the uneven courage of a child's handwriting. Ben passed the drawing across the table, his voice caught somewhere between strength and vulnerability. "You've been part of this family for a long time, but tonight I want to officially ask you to step all the way in. Not because you have to, not because it's expected, but because neither of us, neither Ava nor I, can imagine life without you anymore." Emily took the drawing in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She remembered the woman who had sat alone at this very table 1 year ago, hiding her heartbreak behind a wine glass, convinced that her story had ended. But it hadn't. It had just begun. She looked up at Ben, eyes shining. "I chose to stay a long time ago, Ben. Tonight is just me whispering that choice again. My heart never once changed its mind." He reached across the table, gently taking her hand, his eyes soft, steady. And in that quiet gesture, it was as if every snowflake outside had melted. They stayed like that, the candle flickering between them, the world beyond the window fading into a hush. No grand speeches, no rings, no grand designs. Just one quiet question, and one quiet answer. Yes. The dinner ended with the same dessert Emily had remembered vividly from her first visit to Giovanni's, a delicate tiramisu rich with the scent of coffee and cocoa, served in a small glass atop a white plate painted with a single green olive branch. But this time the sweetness didn't come from the dessert alone. It came from the quiet peace blooming in her chest, the kind of peace that slips in not with fanfare, but with the soft certainty that things once broken are slowly being stitched back together by honesty, by tenderness, by love in its most unassuming form. When they stepped outside, the night breeze brushed past them, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint notes of Christmas music spilling from a nearby storefront. Emily tightened the scarf around her neck, her gaze shifting toward Ben, who was holding her hand, not hurriedly, not for show, but with a steadiness that told her she was home. They walked slowly down the brick-lined street toward the town square, where a towering Christmas tree glowed gold and green, casting soft light over children twirling with candy canes and red-cheeked laughter. Emily smiled at the sight of a young couple wrapped in each other beneath a mistletoe strung between two old trees. She remembered then not just the memory, but the feeling of that night in the park, when Ben first brought her and Ava to release paper lanterns into the winter sky. And how Ava had whispered, "I wish every Christmas could have Miss Emily." Ben slowed as they neared the tree, then stopped altogether. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful but unburdened, like someone who had walked a long road and finally found the place worth staying. "I used to think I would never love again," he said quietly. "That laughing too hard meant I was betraying what came before. But Ava taught me something, that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. When you give it away, you don't lose it, you grow it." From his coat pocket he pulled out a small envelope. No ribbon, no wax seal, just a plain piece of paper folded neatly. Emily opened it. Inside was a letter, short handwritten, not flowery, not poetic, just honest. "We started at an empty table. Tonight I want to invite you to fill not just that table, but this whole life. Not with a ring, but with your presence, every day." Her hands trembled, her eyes stung. She looked up at Ben, unable to speak. He stepped closer, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm not proposing the traditional way," he said. "I'm not asking you to feel any pressure to fit someone else's definition. But I want you to know, I choose you. Every day. And if you choose me too, then let's build a family. No big ceremony, no rush to sign anything, just love and trust." Emily let out a shaky breath, her voice thick with feeling. "Ben, if you're asking whether I want to be your family, yours and Ava's, then the truth is, I've been that person for a long time. I don't need a wedding to know I belong here." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Then, from his other pocket, he took out a fine silver chain with a small heart pendant. On it were 3 initials intricately woven together, E.B. and A. Ava picked the design, he said with a quiet smile. She said if we're not doing rings, then her new mom should still have something to remind her that she's special. Emily laughed through her tears. Ben stepped behind her, fastening the necklace with slow, careful hands. And in that moment, beneath the Christmas lights and amid the hush of a crowd that passed them by without pause, Emily felt the world lean in, not to dazzle, not to applaud, but to bear witness, to something quiet, to something real. There was no grand proposal, no knee on the ground, no applause, only a gentle invitation to share a life fully, every day, and she had already answered long before tonight, with a heart that had been mended and hands that were ready to hold all the unknowns ahead. On the following morning, as the pale winter sunlight slipped gently through the bare branches in the backyard, Ben's kitchen was already alive with soft clinks of dishes, the rhythmic stirring of batter in a mixing bowl, and the warm, buttery scent that wrapped around the room like a familiar embrace. Emily stood at the stove, her hair tied up, wearing one of Ben's oversized sweaters, a wooden spatula in hand. She was making what Ava fondly called celebration pancakes, golden rounds with melting chocolate chips inside and a dusting of powdered sugar on top like fresh snow. She had made them on Ava's birthday, on the day the little girl got her very first perfect score in math, and now again on the first morning they all woke up together after a quiet but momentous night, one without a proposal, yet filled with a promise more enduring than any vow. Ava came padding down the stairs, still barefoot, her hair a tousled halo from sleep, her face lit with the glow of someone waking up in the middle of a dream they didn't want to end. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, folded her arms over her chest, and blinked at the breakfast table. "You really made pancakes, Miss Emily?" she asked, wide-eyed. Emily turned, smiling. "Not just one plate, 3 whole stacks. I figured today was the kind of day that deserved a proper celebration." Ava let out a delighted squeal and ran to the table, standing on tiptoe to admire the golden pancakes piled high, crowned with a single glossy red strawberry. Ben wandered in behind her, cradling a mug of coffee, still half asleep, but unmistakably lit from within by the sight before him. He settled into the chair across from Ava and looked at his daughter with a raised brow. "Do you know why today is special?" Ava shook her head mid-bite. "Because last night," he said, glancing at Emily, "Miss Emily and I officially became a team. No wedding, No white dress, but a family. And every time a new family begins, you should celebrate it with pancakes, obviously. Ava giggled and clapped her hands. Then I'm part of the team too, right? Emily put her fork down and leaned over to wrap her arms around the little girl. Not just part of the team, sweetheart. You're the heart of it. The three of them laughed together. Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch, unfolding it to reveal 3 handmade heart-shaped fabric badges, each one embroidered with a name. He handed one to Emily, one to Ava, and kept the last for himself. I figured it was time to make it official. Ava beamed as she pinned hers to her panda print pajamas, while Emily's hands trembled just slightly as she fastened hers to her sweater. Breakfast unfolded in a soft golden rhythm, bites of sweet pancakes, overlapping stories, and sunlight streaming through the window onto the faces of 3 people who no longer felt like separate lives, crossing paths, but like one story continuing. No one spoke of the Christmas before or the wounds they had carried. There was no mention of loss, no echo of the loneliness that once filled this house. There was only now complete warm and achingly real. And in that small, sun-drenched moment, Emily understood something that had eluded her for so long. That sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it shows up in the most ordinary ways. A stack of pancakes, a morning badge ceremony, a tiny hand resting on yours. And when it does, you don't need to explain it or prove it. You only need to be there, fully, willingly, quietly. That is how love lives. That afternoon, as the sunlight faded gently over the backyard porch, Emily stood before the mirror in the small bedroom of the house that had slowly, quietly become her home. She brushed her hair, smoothed the sleeves of her sweater, not because anyone had asked her to, but because something within her longed to be just right for someone important. Ben had called his mother earlier that week and invited her to dinner, not for any special occasion other than to say without ceremony that Emily was now truly part of their family. And for Emily, though her relationship with Elaine had warmed since Ava's school performance, she couldn't quite shake the nervous flutter inside her. It was the same quiet excitement, the same delicate anxiety a young girl might feel before being formally introduced to someone whose opinion matters more than words can say. In the kitchen, Ben was stirring his mother's heirloom stew recipe with unusual concentration, while Ava set the table with surprising precision, her small lips mouthing the count as she placed each fork and folded napkin. Emily stepped out and knelt beside her to help fold the napkins into tiny flowers. When the doorbell rang, the 3 of them went to answer it together. Elaine stood on the porch in a soft gray coat, her scarf wrapped tight around her neck, her eyes gentler than Emily had ever seen. Ava ran to her, wrapping her arms around her grandmother's waist and tugging her inside like she was afraid she might change her mind. Dinner was warm, full of soft laughter and old stories. Elaine told tales of Ben as a child, how he once tried to build a rocket in the backyard and nearly set the rose bush on fire, stories that made Ava laugh until she fell sideways against Emily's arm and made Ben groan and shake his head, though he smiled all the same. Emily moved through the evening with a quiet grace, pouring more tea, straightening a slightly askew napkin at the corner of the table. These were small things, almost invisible, but they came naturally now, as if she had always belonged in this space. When dinner was over, Ava bounded upstairs to retrieve a new book she insisted on reading with her grandmother. Ben stayed behind to do the dishes. Emily and Elaine stepped out onto the back porch where the air had grown crisp and the trees stood bare against the evening sky. The silence between them was no longer laced with caution. It was calm, settled. Elaine folded her hands in her lap, then turned to Emily with a steady gaze. I used to worry that Ben would never believe in happiness again, she said slowly. When Lauren died, I thought the best parts of him had gone with her. He did everything for Ava, but I could see the emptiness in his eyes, like the world had tilted too far, and he didn't know how to stand straight anymore. Emily said nothing, just listened with her full attention. But since you've come into his life, he's different, Elaine continued, not just in his smile or the way he laughs again. It's in how safe he looks. It's in the way he lets Ava be entirely herself. It's in how they both look at you. She paused, then met Emily's eyes. You brought back something I thought we had lost forever. A real home. A place where trust lives. And I don't need anyone to say it aloud to know it's true. Emily's throat tightened, her eyes stung. Elaine reached over and placed her hand lightly on hers. That's why I wanted to say just one thing tonight. She smiled, then a soft, steady smile that carried decades of life and love and loss. Welcome home, my dear. Just 4 words. But they unlocked something deep within Emily, something that had been held too tightly for too long. She had once wandered through the world believing she was the kind of person people said goodbye to, the kind who never quite fit in, who watched from the outside. But now in this quiet exchange under the winter sky, every piece of that fear melted. It was not just approval. It was belonging. Ben stepped out onto the porch just in time to see the two women sitting side by side, their hands resting gently together, needing no more words. And he knew in that instant that everything he had ever hoped for this woman had already come true. From inside the house, Ava's voice rang out bright and clear. "Mama Emily, come read with me." Emily stood, gave Elaine's hand a final squeeze, and walked inside. She wasn't the woman left alone at a Christmas table anymore. She wasn't wondering whether she was allowed to stay. She was Ava's Emily. She was Ben's. She was a part of this home, this family. And the most beautiful part was that she hadn't needed to earn it or ask for it or wait for someone to make space. She had been invited. She had been named. Family. On that Christmas Eve for Emily, it was one of the darkest and most desolate nights of her life. Sitting alone at a table in a bustling restaurant, surrounded by couples laughing the clinking of glasses and shimmering lights, she felt small, forgotten, and utterly left behind. A date she once hoped would mark a new beginning instead became the quiet end of a fragile faith she had been holding on to. But it was from that very moment, when every door seemed to close, that another opened gently and unexpectedly. A little girl named Ava appeared simply because she didn't want anyone to be alone on Christmas. Her innocent question, "Ma'am, can we sit with you?" was the beginning of a story no one could have predicted. Then came Ben, a father carrying silent wounds of his own, who alongside Emily began to write a story not defined by grandeur, but by deep, quiet emotion. From those first coffee meetings by the river, the conversations about loss and unfinished love, to warm family dinners, quiet hugs, and the moment Ava softly declared she wanted Emily to be her family. Every step felt guided by some unseen hand, something we might call fate. There was no diamond ring, no sweeping aisle or applause, but Emily was welcomed into that family not through ceremony but through love, through a child's trusting eyes, through the honest clasp of a future mother-in-law's hand, through a simple scribbled drawing that read, "Family Forever." Emily's story is not just one of romance. It is a story of healing, a testament that even after being hurt, left behind, or made to believe that happiness is for others, there can still be a place, a person waiting to receive us, if only we dare to open our hearts and take one more step forward. Life may hand us the darkest of nights, but sometimes in the very heart of that night, the gentlest light appears. And sometimes a family is not formed by blood, but by love, trust, and quiet grace. Her story invites us to ask our own questions. How many times have you felt left behind? How often have you thought that joy was for someone else? And have you ever noticed that what felt like an ending was in fact quietly becoming a beginning? Today, through this video, Emotional Echoes sends you a simple yet hopeful message. Sometimes the darkest night is only the beginning of the most beautiful dawn. If you saw yourself in Emily's journey, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share what moved you, what stayed with you. Maybe you thought of your own life or someone dear to you. Tell us, because what you share may touch someone else's heart in ways you'll never know. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video so that more people can experience stories like this. Stories that hold truth, emotion, and meaning in every quiet corner. Emotional Echoes will be here, always ready to bring you the real moments of life, the healing journeys, and the gentle reminders that hope is never too far away. Thank you for being with us through this story. We wish you health, joy, and the warmth of a steady heart, no matter how cold the world may feel outside. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video from Emotional Echoes.